when a lot of people hear the word postpartum depression, they picture a mom unable to take care of her baby, maybe unable to take care of herself, staying in bed all day. And while that could be a version of it, there's so many other versions. And in my experience, for a lot of women, it shows up as a very high functioning depression, where a lot of women with it are taking care of their babies. They're up multiple times a night. They're changing diapers, feeding. They're doing all the things, but inside they're really struggling and really crumbling and feeling the weight of it all. Um, a lot of the symptoms can mimic, a traditional depression. It could be difficulty sleeping at night, or maybe sleeping more than usual, changes in your appetite, a sense of kind of like fogginess, difficulty making decisions, staying focused, thoughts that it'd be better off if I wasn't here. All of those things can certainly be part of it. And as you mentioned, it can also be difficulty bonding with your baby, feeling disconnected from your baby. Even though you might love them very much, you might feel like there's not a connection there.
Welcome to Normalize the Conversation by Inspiring My Generation. I'm your host, Francesca Reicheter. Today, I'm joined by Emily Guarnotta, a licensed psychologist and certified perinatal mental health provider. Today, we're talking about postpartum mental health in a way that's honest, validating, and human. We unpack the difference between what's often dismissed as normal new mom stress and when postpartum depression or anxiety may actually be showing up. This is a conversation about naming what's happening and letting go of shame. So if you or someone you love has felt overwhelmed after having a baby, join us in this conversation. You don't have to carry this quietly. Emily, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm very excited for our conversation, but before we begin, I want to check in. How are you really?
I'm actually doing okay today. We are a couple days into the new year, and it was a little bit of a crazy start. Just as a psychologist with insurance plans resetting and checking benefits, it was a little chaotic, but it's finally Thursday. Tomorrow's Friday, so I'm actually feeling a lot more grounded today. Thank you for asking.
That sounds okay. So I went to school to be a therapist. I haven't started licensing hours yet. And the whole insurance thing sounds terrifying to me. So that sounds like a lot. I'm glad it's Thursday and you're doing better today and feeling more grounded, because that sounds like that was the most terrifying thing to me in school, was when teachers would talk about insurance and the difficulty of it.
There's a lot of challenges. It's manageable. I think there are things that I've learned to make it better, but um, yeah, I learned a lot this year in how to not do it next year when it comes to verifying benefits.
I think it's like that in a lot of things, right? Learning as you're going. I've started to
100%.
realize that recently. I felt like I had to know everything going into something. And then when things didn't go exactly as how I expected it, I was so confused.
Yeah, I think there's a ton of just learning on the go, trial and error. If you wait to know everything, then you're going to be staying in the same spot for so long. So you do kind of have to jump in and figure it out as you go.
Yeah. Oh, that's a scary thing about life, right? Just not having to learn that you're not going to know everything. Not
Yeah,
liking
there's a
it
lot
so
of
far.
winging it that happens.
Not liking it so far. But it's also kind of great because you get to learn. And I love learning, which is why I'm so excited for this conversation. A lot of times going into podcast episodes, I have some kind of experience with the topic. At least people have talked about it around me a lot. And today we're going to talk about the kind of how anxiety and depression show up postpartum. And that's not something I've really had exposure to, not in my personal life, people around me, because I haven't been around a lot of people who've had children. I haven't had children yet. And I haven't seen people really talking about it that much online, in schools, in my training. So I'm excited for this conversation because it's a chance to learn.
Yeah, I really appreciate you having me. And I think you brought up a huge point, which is that even in training to be a therapist, to be a psychologist, we don't really talk a lot about women's mental health, postpartum mental health, reproductive journeys, which is really a problem because it is something that a lot of people go through. And a lot of us as therapists, we're going to encounter, postpartum women, families, women going through infertility, pregnancy loss, but yet a lot of us don't have any experience in how to work with it prior to those people coming through our doors. So I really appreciate you having me here today.
I appreciate you being willing to have this conversation because you don't know what you don't know. And when you hear postpartum depression, for me, I would have assumed going into it originally that that's just like having depression after having a child. And when I started to do research on it, there's so many different pieces. It can even be like feeling disconnected from your child. So I'm excited or interested to learn more about what are actual symptoms of postpartum depression anxiety that may be a warning signs that maybe we miss.
Yeah, there's so many different ways that it can show up, and I think that when a lot of people hear the word postpartum depression, they picture a mom unable to take care of her baby, maybe unable to take care of herself, staying in bed all day. And while that could be a version of it, there's so many other versions. And in my experience, for a lot of women, it shows up as a very high functioning depression where a lot of women with it are taking care of their babies. They're up multiple times a night. They're changing diapers, feeding. They're doing all the things, but inside they're really struggling and really crumbling and feeling the weight of it all. Um, a lot of the symptoms can mimic, a traditional depression. It could be difficulty sleeping at night, or maybe sleeping more than usual, changes in your appetite, a sense of kind of like fogginess, difficulty making decisions, staying focused, thoughts that it'd be better off if I wasn't here. All of those things can certainly be part of it. And as you mentioned, it can also be difficulty bonding with your baby, feeling disconnected from your baby, even though you might love them very much, you might feel like there's not a connection there. These are all different ways that it can kind of present.
I like you said, that initial picture, right? It's exactly what I kind of pictured before I went and did any research. And hearing these different ways, I mean, high functioning, we often don't think about that. And we think if we're doing all of these things, I must be fine, or something must be wrong with me for having intrusive thoughts, or for feeling this way, or for something to just feel a little off, right? Like, why am I feeling this way? I seem to be fine. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Or from the outside, other people looking in, seeing, well, they don't appear to have like a form of depression. So it's not postpartum depression, right? A lot of people, they kind of, right? We assume if someone's high functioning, then
Mhm.
there's nothing actually wrong. So, how can someone, maybe a partner on the outside, recognize some of these warning signs or maybe be more attuned to what's going on?
Yeah, I think for partners, family, and friends, being aware of the more traditional signs, like does she seem like she's really down? Is she crying more? Is she have there been changes to how she's sleeping or eating beyond what having a typical newborn would require? Does she seem just not like herself? And really checking in and asking her, and also asking her, just as you so beautifully did at the beginning of this, like, how are you really doing? Like asking the moms in your life, how are you really doing? Even the ones that seem like they're completely okay and they have it all together, because you just never really know what's going on beyond the surface. And unless you ask that question and you're really ready to hear the answer, you'll just never know.
Wait, I love that important distinction beyond like the norm of having a newborn, right? That lack of sleep, the crying, like paying attention. Is this more than what the typical experience or what the experience should be, right? Am I getting enough sleep? Um, I just think we assume that, well, no one sleeps after having a newborn. Therefore, this is just part of the experience. And maybe recognizing there is a distinction and being able to really check in with ourselves and giving ourselves permission to know that it's okay if we're not okay.
Yeah, 100%. There's so many women that I talk to who have so much trouble sleeping even when their baby's sleeping, where they know their baby's asleep and they finally have a moment to close their eyes and their anxiety and their intrusive thoughts, we know anxiety and intrusive thoughts love nighttime, darkness, isolation. So that's often when that all comes up. And then they have so much difficulty sleeping. And then the next thing they know, the baby's up again. And it's this just constant cycle of anxiety, stress, and lack of sleep.
Yeah. I I didn't think about that. Like being able to sleep when the baby's sleeping. Like if you can't, if you're having those intrusive thoughts, then it's keeping you up. That is a big warning sign. So I know you mentioned before we started talking that you're comfortable sharing about your own experience. For people who are listening that maybe kind of hearing the warning signs, hearing the symptoms, kind of get it, but hearing maybe a bit of a story, some experience, can you share a little bit about what it was like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had my first child about 7 years ago, and at that time I had just was I guess I was a couple of years into working as a psychologist, and I really naively thought that being a mental health professional somehow made me exempt from ever experiencing postpartum depression or anxiety. But when I had her, I got hit with the baby blues pretty hard, pretty fast. And then from there, I felt, and for anyone who doesn't know, the baby blues are something that a lot of about 80% of women experience. And uh, it's kind of a cluster of some anxiety, some sadness, crying for what feels like no reason. It usually hits at about 3 to 5 days postpartum. And then for a lot of people, it gets better after that. But for some of us, it doesn't. And I found that from that point on, I started feeling worse and worse. And I was very much high functioning. I went back to work really quickly, but I was really stressed out about it. I was having difficulty bonding with my baby. I was really on edge, very irritable, felt like I was failing at everything. And it took me a really long time to admit that it was postpartum depression. I felt so much shame about it because I felt like, as a mental health professional, I should have been able to stop it, to get help right away. I actually waited a really long time to seek help to get back into therapy. Probably my daughter was maybe like 8 months before I finally reached out. And the whole thing was just, it was just really eye-opening, that no one is really exempt from it, and some people have more risk factors. Um, in hindsight, I certainly had a lot of risk factors. I had a history of anxiety. I didn't have a lot of family support, which is a huge risk factor. There were a lot of things that contributed to it. But after I did get back into therapy, I found the right provider. I did start getting better. And that really led me in my practice to want to specialize in working with postpartum mental health and perinatal mental health. So after I went through my own healing journey, I went back, got some more training in this area because, like we just talked about, you don't get a lot of training in this in graduate school. And that's really been my focus the last 5 or so years is working with maternal perinatal mental health.
Thank you for sharing. I think that shame piece comes up a lot, right? A lot of times people may feel, okay, based on the research I did in the stories I looked up, because again, I don't have experience in this at all, but it seems like a lot of people were saying that they had this kind of like guilt or shame about not feeling happy enough after having a baby, or feeling like I should have been able to catch this sooner because I've gone to therapy before or I've had exposure to this. I should have had the tools, the skills. Like, how did this happen? I should be able to figure it out myself. I should be strong enough to be able to. Whatever it is, all these kind of ideas in their head. Maybe it's the stigma talking. Maybe it's this just general idea from society of how the experience should be. the shame or guilt prevents a lot of people from actually reaching out, it sounds like.
Yeah. I mean, we're told it's supposed to be the happiest time of your life, and everyone wants to come to meet the baby, and they're all telling you, soak it all up, enjoy every minute. This is the best it's ever going to be. And then when you feel like it's not something that you want to soak up every minute, it makes you think, what's wrong with me? Why am I having such a different experience than everyone else seems to be having? So it definitely fuels a lot of shame.
What do you wish someone had said to you back then in those moments?
I wish, like you had done at the beginning of this interview, someone had asked how I was because everyone was asking how the baby was, which, is great. But as a mom, you almost kind of get pushed to the background and you're just expected to be okay. So I think if someone had really checked in on how I was doing, um, had normalized some of it because I did look around at friends and family who had babies and everyone seemed like they were getting on so well, which makes you really feel like there's something wrong with you. I wish in hindsight, I know that a lot of people were having more of a hard time than they were letting on, but there was a lot of, presenting really well. And social media, of course, plays a huge part in that. So the postpartum moms that I work with, I'm always checking in on how they're using social media because that's just a huge, it's a really big thing that can fuel a lot of comparison and shame.
Yeah, I imagine that must be really hard going on social media and seeing everyone smiling and sharing like all these. I know I always see like people I went to high school with are all having kids now. So I see like all these like really cute photos and all the smiling and the little milestones, right? And the 1 month photo shoot, 2 month photo shoot, and the matching outfits and all these things. And it looks like the picture perfect image every single day, every single photo. And I imagine if you're a mom experiencing postpartum depression or anxiety, and you're seeing that, it must feel very difficult that comparison, seeing everyone else's like picture perfect image. And why am I not feeling that way and experiencing it in that same way? And am I missing out in some way?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, even when you know that it's a highlight reel, still emotionally our brains, when we see images like that, have a way of, questioning like what's wrong with me that I'm not having the same experience as that person. So I do believe social media has made postpartum mental health and all mental health in general, more challenging in a lot of
How,
ways.
how can someone be more maybe mindful with their use if they know that that's something they're experiencing, utilizing social media in a way that's kind of mindful and productive for them. So they're not going online stuck in this comparison game that's causing more distress for them.
I always encourage my clients to kind of check in with themselves about their relationship with social media and ask themselves questions like, how do I feel when I'm on it? Um, I think that's the big one, like asking, how do you feel when you're scrolling? Do I feel good? Am I getting valuable information and tips, or am I logging off and feeling, not so good? Do I, 9 times out of 10, do I feel worse after I'm scrolling? And setting boundaries around it too, if you find that you're not feeling so good on it, limiting your time. My New Year's resolution this year is to not go on social media before like 9 a.m. Which sounds even terrible that that has to be my limit because I wish that it was, I wish I could say like I could do a full detox, but I found that going on in the morning, it was such a vulnerable time for me that that was really impacting the rest of my day. So, whether it's setting detoxes or even mini boundaries like that, putting those things in place, especially when you're going through something as vulnerable, as motherhood.
Yeah, those checking in with yourself is so important. And we're often not taught that that's okay. And putting ourselves first sometimes, realizing that if being online or doing something is causing me distress or discomfort. I don't have to be following certain accounts. I
Mhm.
don't have to be checking online and scrolling all day, every day. And we don't realize we have a lot more control than we realize over how we use our time,
Yeah.
especially our screen time. And sidebar, it's so funny that you said that because I did that too, the 9 a.m. thing. 9
Ugh.
a.m. to 5 a.m. is how I have my screen time set now for social media. And every morning, I always hit like the remind me in 15 minutes 200 times before 9 a.m. So I'm failing at it. But that was also mine. So it's funny that you said that.
Yeah, yeah. The morning is just such a vulnerable time.
Yeah,
Um, but I think none of us like we weren't taught how to have a healthy relationship with social media. It's all so new. I mean, even our parents' generation, they didn't have this, so no one was there to kind of teach us what a healthy relationship looks like. I mean, that's really what we should be teaching our kids in schools, right? Is because this is going to be such a huge part of their lives. Like, how can you have a healthy relationship with this thing and not one that's wrapped up in social comparison and addiction and all the other stuff that it brings.
absolutely. And that starts with just learning how to really check in with ourselves and seeing how it is impacting us and being willing to recognize and acknowledge it and admit it. Because a lot of times we just kind of mindlessly scroll and don't even pay
Yeah.
attention to how it's impacting us. And then think, I don't know. I know for me, a lot of times, I'm like, I don't know why I feel so upset with how, like, my lack of, for example, I have my accounts, right? Everyone is together all the time. It looks like they have people surrounding them. And then a lot of times I work from home, for example. So people might be posting with their coworkers and doing things. And then I'm sitting home working behind a computer screen. So I'm like convinced all the time that I'm alone. I have no one. I'm like, I don't know why I feel this way. But if I just put my phone down and wasn't looking at Instagram, scrolling all day, seeing those pictures of everyone together, recognize that it's making me feel like I'm alone all the time when instead I could pick up the phone and use my screen to call someone and make a plan. It's just recognizing how it's impacting us and what else we could do instead makes such a difference. And it's been so hard for me because then I have to admit that I'm also playing a role in how I'm feeling.
Yeah, we do so many things on autopilot.
Yes.
Mhm. And taking that step back and observing what we're doing versus just mindlessly doing it is it's really hard to do, but it's great when you can take that step back and make that connection and then make that decision and say, okay, maybe I need a little bit of a break from this.
Yeah, it was a tool I learned in therapy. And on that note, what are some of, so you said it took 8 months when you finally went to therapy, and now you kind of specialize this as a therapist. What are some tools that moms can learn in therapy when experiencing postpartum depression, anxiety? What are the benefits of really reaching out for support?
Yeah, I think there's so many. So just having that safe space to talk in itself is a huge benefit where you know you're not going to be judged. You can share every scary, shameful thought, feeling that you're having with this person who's going to non-judgmentally be empathic and supportive to you is huge. Um, it can help you reframe some of the ways that you're thinking about yourself, about motherhood. It can help you gain control over the anxiety that you're having because anxiety is a huge part of this too. You know, we want to protect our babies, and a lot of times our brains put us into overprotective mode as a very adaptive response to being a mom, but sometimes that can get kind of out of hand. So therapy can help us rein that in a bit so that we're, you know, being vigilant with our babies, but we're not being overly anxious to a point where it's negatively impacting us. It can help us work through traumas that we might have experienced along the way. One of the biggest learnings for me has been that motherhood is a pretty complex journey for a lot of people. It's rarely a straight line for a lot of people. It involves infertility, it involves pregnancy losses, So, a lot of women kind of accumulate traumas along the way, and therapy is a place to process that. And another big thing that I've learned is that becoming a mother can really bring up a lot about your own childhood that maybe you thought you resolved, but has a way of coming back up again. So, therapy can be a really valuable place to talk about that and explore what that means to heal from that.
That is so true. I wasn't even thinking about those last 2 points. And that is so true, right? The experience it takes to get there. A lot of people experience it takes a while to be
Mhm.
able to get pregnant, right? A lot of people go through such a long journey
Yeah.
and it can face a lot of loss, a lot of trauma along the way, and feel so isolating in so many moments because a lot of people don't even feel like they can talk about it. And to have a space where you can explore that and feel maybe held and heard and seen for the first time can be amazing. And then, as well as things coming up from your childhood, I know a lot of times, just with my parents, even still with me as an adult, we'll be talking about something and have an experience, and it'll trigger something from their childhood and the way they react. And then afterwards, we come back, and my dad's like, sorry, I reacted based on experience from me and my dad and had nothing to do with me and you. And I don't want our relationship to feel that way. And we've come so far with his communication skills.
Wow, I
We're
was going to
proud.
say your dad sounds very emotionally intelligent. That's
Sometimes
amazing.
go dad sometimes. Um, but we've gotten better at that and being able to recognize it. But a lot of times we don't recognize it or we don't realize how much it's impacting us or never have a space to really process it. Right. So actually having that space, those are amazing things you can do in therapy as well. And I didn't even think about that, which is feels so silly not even thinking about those two aspects. But therapy really can be a great place. And then for people who maybe are struggling to find a therapist or don't have the resources to access therapy, can you recommend some starting points maybe for them until they're able to access therapy or tools that work for them?
Yeah, Postpartum Support International is a nonprofit group, and they have a lot of free support groups that are right online, and they're geared towards different types of parents. So they have support groups for postpartum moms, they have ones for NICU parents, for parents who have experienced pregnancy loss, just a ton of military parents, a ton of different support groups. So I often recommend people start there if they can access therapy or maybe they're not ready for therapy. Um, Also, local support groups like local mom groups, getting connected. I love mom groups that do like the walk, like walking with the kids in the strollers, because getting outside and being around people is so healing and so helpful. So those are definitely some of the resources that I would recommend.
Thank you for sharing. I think a lot of people don't know that there's resources out there and that there's free resources out there. A lot of times when therapy is inaccessible, people feel like there's nothing for me and I'm kind of stuck in this. So knowing about free resources makes such a difference. And as we are kind of beginning to wrap up, what's, I guess, one last thing you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I think just kind of piggybacking off of your first question, which I absolutely loved, is just to check in on the moms in your life. I mean, or anyone in your life too. I think just the point that you really never know what someone's going through or what struggles they're carrying. So just checking in, asking how they are and being ready for the answer. I think, if we all did that like once today, um, how much of a better place would the world be?
Right? How are you really makes such a difference. And a lot of times we've turned it into a greeting and we
Yeah.
don't say it with intention. And if we really gave someone the space to just be a human being, be vulnerable, and exist and show up as they are, it can make such a difference. And when we do, if someone needs support, it can be the difference between whether or not they ask for it or they share something that leads to you maybe helping them find support.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. But really be ready to hear the answer too, because you're right. It is kind of just a check off box that we have in social interactions, but really asking and then being ready to hear what the answer is. It's such a beautiful gift to give someone. So thank you for that today.
Thank you so much for being here with me, with sharing all this useful information. I wish these were things I learned, especially in grad school. Like, I wish this was something that was taught to me. I wish that these were conversations were being held more because I can't imagine the isolation that so many moms are feeling. So I appreciate you for having these conversations, for the work that you're doing. How can people learn more about you and your work?
Yeah, well, I have a therapy practice. It's called Phoenix Health, and we specialize in maternal mental health. Our website is joinphoenixhealth.com. So I'm also on Instagram and LinkedIn. My Instagram is Dr. Emily Gornata. And yeah, I'd love to connect.
Thank you so much for listening to Normalize the Conversation. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. This podcast is an initiative of Inspiring My Generation, focusing on normalizing the conversation, bringing education and awareness to the forefront, and amplifying global voices to spark change and hope. Inspiring My Generation is a 501c3 nonprofit organization on a mission towards suicide prevention through awareness, conversation, education, and support. Connect with us on Instagram at Inspiring My Generation and visit our website inspiringmygeneration.org to learn more about our work and how you can make a difference.